this way and kind of come up this way. I want these two to be fairly close together. That seems about right, right? Maybe slightly lower, yeah, ish, something like that. That'll work, okay? So now that I'm done, I'll go ahead and commit to, or I've already committed to that. We're good. We can take this layer 0 and we can switch it back to normal mode, right? And so now what I need to do is I need to be able to cut out, right, this building. And I have a couple strategies for doing that. To me, I think the easiest is to jump back to our color version, in which case, let me turn this off. Turn this off. Right? We can go ahead and we can use the magic wand to select all of that color. Right? So we know that that piece is going to be background, but we also want to go up. So I'm holding down Shift to add the rest of this. Right? So that's all of the sky there. And so I have that selected. We'll go back to my original kind of background image here. And let's go ahead and add a layer mask to that, which means it's going to cut out for the building. Right? Now, if I turn back on, right, my original image here, and I switch it back to multiply again. Oops, I have to be on this layer. Multiply. Right? We're going to start to see through quite nicely. We've got a little bit of an issue because I clipped off the bottom of that image, and I really need that to come back. So let me come to my mask here, and with my paintbrush in white, we can just paint that part back in. Oops, a little too much there. All right, so let me flip to black. Let me zoom in here. And I'll add that part in. All right, looks like I'm missing just a little bit there. So let me go ahead and get that part back right along there, like so. So I'll press Control-0 now, and so we can see now that I have my section. It's integrated into this background piece. The section's low in the overall drawing, which I think weighs nicely with the photograph. I can go ahead and go to my crop tool because I've got a lot of extra here up at the top. So we can jump over to the crop tool and drag this down to there because we don't need that extra space anymore. Right? When I added to the canvas, I gave myself plenty of extra space, and now I'm cutting back a little bit in terms of what I'm getting. Okay. So we have that kind of nicely laid out from a sectional standpoint. Now it comes time to start to deal with some of the interior. What are we seeing through this particular building? And I will be honest in saying that I'm probably not going in exactly the order that I wrote this up. But sometimes as you're doing this, you do some things, and then you come back and do other things. So there's a variety of strategies for what we can do. So let me zoom in on my building itself, and the first thing that I want to deal with is I want to deal with the fact that these are windows, and the windows look out onto my scene. Okay? So I'd like there to be first, right, holes through this such that I can see what's going on beyond. So I'll go ahead and use my magic wand, and I have to be on the layer itself, sorry. And I'll select each one of these panes. So I can hold down Shift and select each of these panes. Right? And if I just press delete, right, we're at least going to see through, or we should be seeing through, to the background. Okay? Unfortunately, I masked off the background, so I have to get that back. I'll get that in just a second. So let me go ahead and select the rest of these. Right? I'll hold down Shift and select the rest of these windows. I know this is a little painful for you guys to sit and watch me select these, but I do have to select them. And we just have to be patient while I click. All right, a few more. Okay, so I have all of those selected. I'll press delete again. We see the checkerboard pattern through the windows, which means it is transparent. However, I don't see the background. So let me come back to the background and paint with white, and I'll bring the background back so that we can see through our particular windows. So let me go ahead and deselect here. Right? And now we see that we're seeing through the windows, which isn't a bad thing. Okay? The only challenge with this is that I really would like to have these windows appear slightly different so that it looks like we're seeing through glass rather than through, and this is again a bit of interpretation on my part, but I'd like it to be obvious that what we're seeing through is actually windows, not a hole in the wall or something like that. So I'm going to make a modification to the background, right, underneath where each of these windows are. And I can do that by just making a couple selections here, right, which I'll do. Right? And once I have those selections made, I can go up to my layer, new adjustment layer, and I'm going to do a hue and saturation adjustment. Right? And so we'll go ahead and hue and saturation 1. Right? You notice that when I did that, because I already had the selection, it gave me a mask for where that color shift was going to occur. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with both the hue and saturation here to shift the color, right? And I don't know if you can see this as well there. I can shift the color to be a little bit more blue, right? You might be able to kind of see this. This is the kind of thing you'll see it much better, right, if you watch it after or when I post the actual images after. I've shifted the color of this background so that it's a little bit different than the color of the image itself. And it makes it look more like it's going through a window than just the actual hole. So I've done that slight adjustment. I am going to make this apply just to the layer directly below it, just in case I change the layers down the road. So I'm going to press Control, Alt, and then G, which gives me the application just to the layer directly below it. Okay? So I've done that adjustment now. And so now it's about doing a little bit more collage work, right, should I want to. And again, we're getting into the realm where you have to decide how much is appropriate, how much is not appropriate for your particular drawings. So I'm going to go ahead and do more than I might normally do, just so you can see different strategies. So the next strategy is I want to add some interior paneling, say, to the ceiling up here to give it a little bit more texture. And then I'll add some texture to the wall itself. So let me go ahead and jump back into the Creative Commons search here. And let's search for whitewash wood. How about texture? And so it's going to take a little bit. Something like this one might actually work okay. Yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, we'll use that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click the download here. And the original size is just fine. There it is. Let me go ahead and show it. And then copy this to my flash drive. So let me jump over to my flash drive. And we'll put it in 129. There it is. All right, so let's come back to Photoshop. Now I'm going to apply this texture in these regions here. Right? So I'll use the magic wand again, and I'll select each of these regions. Right, that actually has that attached there. This and this. Right? And I should probably do this and this. And so those are where I'm going to apply it to. Let me go ahead and go to File and then Place. All right, and we'll drop this in. It's a lot bigger than I need, so let's go ahead and shrink it down a little bit. And it's also, I need to adjust the rotation here so that it's either vertical or horizontal, whatever seems like it fits. So let's go ahead and shrink this down a little bit more. Rather convenient for the end here. Once it's done, I'll go ahead and say OK. And then it's here on its layer. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on it and say Rasterize Layer to make it a live object instead. And then I'm going to select it and then copy and paste it. So Control-C, Control-V. And then I can drag it over to kind of fill in these other pieces as well. Now, I believe that this was a tiling texture when I downloaded it, so I should be able to seam these together reasonably well. Something like that. So I have these now applied, right? I have a bunch of the layers together. So let's turn off everything except those layers. Like that. So I have just these pieces together. And so I want to merge these layers together. So I can go up to Layer and then Merge Visible, because those are the only ones that are on right now. And they're all on one layer now. we'll come back to my original line drawing, and I'm going to select these regions again. So again, just holding down Shift as I click through. Zoom in a little bit. Like that. I have those selected, right? We'll go back to the layer that has these images on it, and we'll click on the Add Layer Mask. And now those will be cut out, right, for that upper portion of the building. Okay? So now I need a different texture or something to go in the bottom part of the building. So let me go back to Creative Commons, right? And I'd love to find something else. Let's say, maybe we'll use this one. So I'll go ahead and download this one as well. Show it in its folder. There it is. I'm going to copy this and again take it all the way to my flash drive into today's exercise. And we'll paste that. And then we'll jump back to my drawing here. I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'll pick this image this time. There it is. Again, we have to shrink this down a little bit because it's way too big. It's probably about like that. Go ahead and say OK. And then there it is. Right there. Let's rasterize this layer. And then I'm going to copy it and paste it. So it's just Selection, Control-C, Control-V. And I end up with a copy of it like that. Again, this one seams rather nicely, which is good. A lot of times when you search for texture, you'll get ones that'll seam, which is a good thing. And so I just need to copy and paste a few of these together. And I'm just continuing to press Control-V to add in these images. If I had aligned the first image a little bit better, I wouldn't have to have this row. I just have that tiny little bit along the seam that I need. So I'll keep going here. Almost there. All right, so I've covered that bottom section of the building now. Obviously, I have a bunch of layers, so let's turn off everything except for this. And then once again, I'll go up to Layer, Merge Visible. They'll be all on one layer. We'll jump back to my drawing here. I can even turn this off. And I'm going to select the lower parts. So I'll select, oops, the on it itself. There we go. I'll select that. Let me hold down Shift, and I'll select here. I actually think I want the texture to run through there a little bit. And I'll select this, this, and that. Okay? So I have those selected. Actually, my roof texture should have this little piece in there as well. So anyway, I have those selected. Let's turn this back on. And I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask there. And I get the siding for this piece. Okay? So this is really, really strong compared to the nice kind of whitewashedness of this one. So I need to make some color adjustments to this one so it's not quite so dominant. It doesn't feel so dark. So let's go ahead and add. I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let's do a saturation. Let's do a hue and saturation first. I'll go ahead and say OK. I want this to apply just to the siding, not to anything else. So Control-Alt-G to make it apply. And then let's make a few adjustments. I'm going to tone down the saturation a bit so that there's less color. And then I'm going to increase the lightness of it, right, until it feels more like this upper texture. Maybe like that. Okay? If I didn't like the color of it, I could adjust the hue a bit. if it's a little too blue, I could make it more of a particular color. But right now, I'm not going to change that. Okay. Let me go back to 0 here. OK, so I have that. I've got this kind of lower texture. I've got the upper texture starting to look fairly good. And again, that's only applying to the texture here. We can turn back on my background so we can see it with a little bit more context. I said that I mistakenly should have this on this as well. So if I went back to here, I could add to the selection these two, go back to my layer mask on this, and then paint with white and get that back. It looks like I'm missing a little bit of it there, but we'll just go with it for right now. Right? Actually, let's do, since I don't have enough of that background texture, let's go back to this one. And we'll paint that in. OK? So now I have a little bit of this background texture. Right? I can press Control-0. We can see the whole thing and what it looks like so far. The next thing that's sometimes useful is to add a little bit of a lighting effect to your interior sections. And we can do that. I can press Control+ here. We can do that by using a new layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer. And I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to put this up on top of everything. And we'll call this lighting. And I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to what's called soft light. Okay? Then I'll pick my brush. And I want this brush, that diameter is actually pretty good, but I want the hardness to be at 0, so it's a really soft, diffuse brush. And then I'm going to pick a color for this brush that's kind of a yellowish orange. Maybe something like that or so. Right? And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up at the top, and I'm going to draw down. Right? And you can see that I've created a streak. This is too strong for right now. Right? But we can create another streak on the wall, something like that. Something like that. Something like that. The other thing that happens with light is it gets bigger as we get to the bottom. So it doesn't hurt to spread out the light as you get to the bottom. So all I did was I took the brush, used my bracket keys, made it a little bit bigger, made it a little bit bigger, and made it a little bit bigger, right, to make that little bit of a cone shape. Same thing here. We'll go there. We'll go there. And we'll go there. Right? And so we've got a little bit of a fall off. Let me make this smaller so I can point better. We've got a little bit of a fall off here, a little bit of a fall off there. It's looking pretty good. It's still way too yellow, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the opacity of this down, right, to make it a little bit more subtle. Right? And it's amazing. On mine here, you can barely see it. And then when we look up here, for whatever reason, the yellow really comes through. So such is life. Right? We'll do it for your projector. There you go, something like that. So it's a more subtle change. The other thing is if you don't like what the yellow looks like, if it's the wrong color yellow, go back and change the color yellow, and that can help as well. Okay? So that adds just a little bit more character to the lighting conditions of your particular scene. Let me double check to make sure there's nothing else inside that I wanted to show you. All right, looks pretty good. OK, so there isn't anything else that I wanted to show you on the inside. I could obviously spend a little bit more time. I could add wood beam textures for the trusses. I could put a door in here. I mean, there's many more things that I can do, but you guys don't need to sit here and watch me do everything. But at the same time, I want to point out a few other things that can be useful for the background. First thing is I've got a little bit of an edge showing here. So let's use the crop tool and adjust that so we don't get that anymore. Right, so it's a nice sharp on all sides. Okay, there are different strategies for what you might do with the background. Some people like the full color background, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people would rather have a background that's a little bit different in tone, so that it's more of a drawing look. So if I wanted to adjust the background and change the tone of the background, right, I can select the background, right, and actually this is where the color comes back in, turn everything else off, right. I can select, I can select the background here, that piece as well, right, and we're going to end up with a little bit more down below, so I'll go ahead and just select this, which is basically everything but the house. We'll jump back to my background here, and I'm going to go ahead and say layer, new adjustment layer. And this time we'll do, I don't know, maybe a, let's do a channel mixer maybe. And I'll go ahead and say OK. We may switch, for example, into black and white for contrast. It sometimes will make the window stand out. The other thing that we can do if we don't want to do a black and white is we can change the overall tone. Why isn't it previewing for me? Come on. We can sometimes change the overall tone to be a little bit more brown. Channel mixer's not probably the right thing to do. Let me go back to layer, new adjustment layer. Let me see what I did in this one. I did a hue and saturation. I'll say OK. And I'm going to pick colorize to change the overall tone of the image. This is definitely too red, so let's try to shift that. Maybe more like that. We can lighten that image up a little bit. Basically, I'm transforming the background to make it distinctly different than the rest of it. I also want to make sure that that hue and saturation adjustment comes down here, right, and applies just to my, let me put it right there, so that it applies just to my color image, etc. So I've got that applied. Now the next thing, let's go ahead and turn back on a few things. Right, so we're starting to see this together, except for the color. Right, the other thing that can be useful, right, is that I may decide that instead of having this inside a box, inside a frame, right, I might decide that I want it to just live at the bottom of my presentation board, in which case making the top of this fade away is really useful. Because instead of having a nice sharp edge, it would be nice if it just evaporated. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to the layer mask for the background. I'm going to select what is, come on. All right. It's not going to let me do it. We're going to have to go back to my color so I can select that and this. So I'm just in this part, right, the sky mode, so to speak. We'll jump back to my layer mask here. And what I want to have happen is I want, right now it's all white, right, which is all transparent. I want the top to fade instead of being white to black. So I'm going to use a gradient tool, right there. And I'm going to draw a gradient starting from about, I have white and black there, starting from about here up to there. Right, and it's going to fade the top of that image out. Let me turn this off so you can see it. Right, if that was too quick of a fade, right, I can do a longer fade, something like from here all the way to there. Right, and it's slowly fading that part of the image out. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn back on. Not this. That. It's a little bit hard for you guys to see because the background isn't entirely white. Let me go to this. It's not necessary to do this part of it, but to make it a little bit easier for you to see, I'm going to go ahead and do it. There we go. Just so you can see it a little bit better. And what that's doing is it's fading off the sky so that if this was living at the bottom of a presentation as your sight sections, right, it wouldn't be competing with other parts of your drawing. Right? You could, for example, have your plan appear above this, and it wouldn't detract from the overall image. Okay, so it looks like the one last thing that I'll point out is it looks like because I applied the sepia tone to this, I lost some of the bluishness of the windows. So I want to go back and deal with that. Let me turn off. We've got the blue applying here. Let me see what I want to do here. Let's go ahead and drag this up so it's separate. So that's there. Let's turn that back on. There, I just needed to get it outside of its layer stack. Now it's applying. You can kind of see the blue a little bit better. So that was a layer order issue. But now that that's been resolved, we can kind of see what this looks like as an overall section. Okay? And so, like I said, there's more that you could do. You could add the wood beam texture. You could beef up the lighting. Your end, you can see the lighting much better than I can, but you kind of get the idea. Okay? So again, this is all written up in Assembly 10.3, so you can follow it step by step if you want to do it that way. But if you want to just skip around a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that either. Are there any questions? No? All right. I'll turn you loose. I didn't get the copies. Hold on. Okay, so sorry for that delay. Apparently, I'm ready for the semester to be over, too. 3 days left. We're going to do sections today, perspectives on Monday. Then we'll work on the portfolio the last day, kind of do some touch-up stuff. I will go over and grab the stack of portfolios so you guys can look at it today and get your minds around it. The portfolios are the final, which is why we're not spending too much time doing it, because you should be working on it. It's kind of your project, test how much you've learned, that sort of thing. So hint, hint, start working on it some more, right? Anyway, so we're going to talk today about sections. The good news for all of you is I have this section thing, probably the best written out explanation that I've ever had. It's Assembly 10.3 in the tutorials. It's in the book too, but it goes through as step by step. I think it goes all the way up to 27 steps of every 29, 30, 31 steps. But it actually walks through every single thing to end up creating this image. And the purpose being that I want to give you as much as possible. My goal is to have every one of these this well documented, but I don't. But this one is, so we might as well take advantage of that. And you're welcome to follow along with that if I go through something a little too fast or whatever. Again, it's going to be based on your particular building, so it might look different than this, but the concepts are still the same. So anyway, you can find that under tutorials. If you go to the last one, assemblies, and then you go to 10.3, it's there. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've opened up the same file that I've been working with before. And this time I want to take a section cut. So it's essentially the same thing as what we did last week with the plan, or last class with the plan view, only this time we're going to cut the opposite direction through the building. So I have the large tool set shown, just like I did before. If you don't, you can go to View, Toolbars, and then check the box for Large Tool Set. And then I'm going to click on the Section button, or the Section Plane button here, which is going to give me a section plane. And instead of having it going down, like we had for the plan, I'm going to have it going vertically as I cut through the building. Now, I have the choice of which direction I want to cut through the building. I'm going to cut the long direction through the building to have a little bit more to work with. But you're welcome to cut the short direction if you'd rather cut that way. It's really up to you in terms of what view looks best. So once I've selected and clicked, it's cut the first bit of the section here. This is nowhere near the actual position that I want the section to be in, but it's oriented correctly. So if I can zoom out in the world of SketchUp to see my section plane, right, which is here. I actually have a couple because I've done this a few times. There it is. Now I can zoom back in, and we'll scroll, scroll, scroll. Good old SketchUp, right? Come on. There we go. And once I have it selected, I can use the Move tool. And one of the neat things about this is it's kind of a dynamic section. So as I move it, we can cut further into my building, right? And so you can see that this building has a series of trusses inside. And so there's some detail, which is nice. And I can choose where I want to cut this section in the building. So I can drag forward and backwards to find what the ideal place would be. I'm going to pick somewhere along about that as my section. And once I have that cut like this, right, I'm going to go ahead and reorient my views so that I can see this section in place. So let me go to my camera menu here, and I'll go to standard views, and because my building is orthogonal, right, I'm going to pick one of the standard views. I think it's the front view. Yep, there it is. And as I zoom in, we can see that there is the section cut of my building, and I can kind of see what the building looks like. Now, this is still very much in perspective, right? It's a one-point perspective where all of our lines recede to the center. I don't want to see that because it's not a true elevation, so I'm going to switch right here in camera to parallel projection. And once I've switched to parallel projection, now I'm seeing what is a true elevation or section view of this particular building. So there it is. I do have a few shadows that are being shown here, but you see how it's kind of grayed a little bit? That's because the section plane is being shown. And so I'm going to uncheck section planes here, and now I have a little bit brighter image, a little bit clearer image. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my shadows. So let's go back to turn off shadows. There we go. And now we're looking into the building rather nicely. And so I'm going to go through and do exactly what we've been doing with my exports, same process. So I'll start with the hidden line mode. So I have this. When I click on hidden line mode, unfortunately my detail comes or my section plane comes back and it kind of grays it out. So once again, I have to go to view and then uncheck section planes. The exercise handout and the tutorial also mention a plugin called Section Cut Face. It was supposed to have been installed on these computers, and unfortunately it was never installed, so that's why I'm skipping it. If you have your own computer and want to do it, it's simply a right click and it will fill in everything that you've cut through, which is nice. I'm going to have to do it after the fact in Photoshop, take a little extra time, but it will still end up in the same place. Okay, so I have this shown. My shadows are off. I want to make sure my axes are off. There was that little dotted red line. I don't need that. And so now I've kind of clarified here. I've got just the line drawing. I've got it zoomed to the right level so that I have just enough. Actually, I'd like this to be a little bit lower in my drawing because I want a little bit more sky ultimately. And so now it's time to save this view or this scene. So I'm going to go to Window and then Scenes and save this. And obviously I have some of the other views already saved from previous semesters. But I'll go ahead and click on the plus icon here, and we'll go ahead and create a scene. And let's look at the information about this scene and rename it to be section. I'm going to say section cut 3 because I already have the other two sections here. There it is, section cut 3, and that allows me to come back to this particular view if I were to mess it up. Okay? So let's start with this basic line drawing. I'm going to go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And once again, I'll click on Options, and my size is still set from last time. Depends on your computer. The reason I request that you look at this is because if the computer's been restarted, you might be back in the default settings instead of what your last settings were. So this will work for me. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I want to go to my flash drive, and we'll go to 229 or 129. And let me create a folder for this semester. And we'll call this Lines. And I'll go ahead and click Export. All right, so I have that established. Now I'm going to go over to my Edit button here, assuming it doesn't completely crash on me. And in this view, the shadows are really not as important, but I want to look at them just in case. So if I turn off edges and profiles for just a second, and I turn on shadows, right? All of the shadows are basically falling inside of the building through where I cut them. Okay? So it's not really doing me any good to have these shadows. You may, depending on where your section is, have a shadow that falls up on top of the roof or something from one roof to another roof, in which case that shadow would be important. I'm going to skip the shadow export because there's really nothing of value in this export right now. So we'll come back and we'll turn back on edges and profiles. We can try also the X-ray view, which may give us a little bit of information. It may not, but it's worth the export. We get a little bit of faint information about what's happening behind. So I'll go ahead and export that. Question? Oh, I left my shadows. No, the shadows are off, aren't they? I think X-ray mode overrode the shadows. Anyway, we'll go ahead and go to File, Export 2D Graphic. And we'll call this X-ray. And I'll click Export. All right, so we'll uncheck X-ray here. And then from here, I'm going to go to one of my sketchy edges styles, like my pen gray, and kind of make a little bit more casual look of this. And we'll go ahead and go to File, Export 2D Graphic. But when I did that, notice that I got the grayish plane in the background. It's much harder for you to see on the projector than when you're doing it live. It just means I have to go back and make sure I turn off section planes again to get that white background. And I'll go to File, Export 2D Graphic. And we'll call this one Pen Gray. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. And so the other thing that I tend to do on the section export is I'll use one of the other kind of default styles that has some color in it, something like this. And I am going to turn off the section planes. I'm going to turn off the guides, and I'll turn off the axes. I like this one with color, not because I'm going to actually use it in Photoshop, but it makes selecting the ground versus the sky really easy, as opposed to having to do a manual selection. So I use this as kind of a quick selection method for the background. So I'll go ahead and export this one, 2D Graphic, and we'll call this one Color. Click Export for that as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. And I'm going to bring these drawings in just like I've been doing. So I'll go to File, Open for the first one, and I'm going to pick the lines. We'll go ahead and say Open. There it is. And then I'll go to File and then Place. And I'll place in the other pieces. So we'll start with color here. You can confirm it. We'll go to File, Place. And we'll bring in the X-ray. And I'll confirm it. And I'll go to File and then Place. And I'm going to bring in the Pen Gray. And I'll go ahead and place. So now I have all three of those other drawings imported. I have to switch their blending modes. So on each one of these, I'm going to switch the blending mode to multiply so that we see through. Right. Color one really doesn't matter so much because, again, I was using that as a color selection ultimately. Okay. So I have these drawings layered up. Right. If we look at it that way, there's my initial drawing. First thing that I want to do is start working on the section itself. And so one of the important things about a section is that you're cutting through the building somewhere. And it's important to identify that, yes, I've cut through the building. And typically what we do is we fill in what's been cut with a dark color so that it's clear that this is what's been cut through. Likewise, the ground needs to be cut through as well. So I'm going to start with those. And let's turn off these upper two layers for a second and focus just on this background layer. I'm going to press Control plus to zoom in a bit. Right? And so I can use the magic wand to select the internal regions. Right here, I can hold down Shift, and I can continue to select internal regions like that, which is one way of doing it. Yeah?
The background is the one that you've placed?
The background is the first one. It's just the lines. Right. It doesn't really matter which order they're in. I just like as plain of lines as I can get. So once I have these regions selected, what I'm going to do is use the paintbrush tool with black. Oh, I have to say layer from background because it's locked. There we go. Definitely not a bird brush. We're going to use just the standard brush here. And I can paint this in. Now, the magic wand doesn't look like it did the best job at actually selecting my regions, which means I'm going to have to do some manual selections. So I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool to draw in these sections. I can hold down Shift to add to the selections. All right, so I can add that. I can add this to the selection. This just takes a little bit of time. The other thing I can use is this polygonal lasso tool, which will allow me, if I hold down Shift, to again add to the selection, but I can draw a diagonal line. Right? And the good news is it just takes a little bit of time to go around my objects. Like this. Oops. And I can double click when it's done. I've added that to the selection, and now I can go back to my paintbrush again, and we can paint that in, paint this in. Right, and I can paint this part in as well. So I'm choosing to paint this in black, which is kind of the traditional way of doing. Oops, sorry about that. It's a traditional way of identifying a section. You just color it in black. There are other ways of doing it. Some people prefer more of a light gray color. That would be fine as well. But it's really a matter of taste in terms of what you pick to do this with. So again, I'm working with that rectangular marquee to fill in more and more of these regions. And it takes just a little bit of patience to get through all of them. So bear with me. Again, I'm holding down Shift to add to each selection as I go along. And then I can jump back to my paintbrush and we can paint this part in. And you can see that rather quickly, when I do this, we can start to see clearly what's been cut through in this particular building. All right, so I've got a little bit more, so continue to bear with me here. I'm going to switch back to the polygonal lasso tool. We'll go along this roof line here. Come down to there. And I'll switch again over to the paintbrush and we'll paint this last bit in. Oh, looks like I missed a tiny bit in the bottom corner here, so we'll go back with the rectangular marquee and we'll paint that in. So it does take a little bit of time, and this is where if I had that section cut face plug-in, I could have saved a little bit of my time because it would have done it already for me. But now if we step back and we look at it, it's very clear what's been cut through on this building, and that's the big purpose of the section. Now, at this point, I also need to show that the ground has been cut through. And that's one of the really critical parts of a building section. If it was just a line drawing, we might do just a kind of a fat line at the bottom that would indicate it. But in this sense, since we're going to do so much collaging, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the ground with a nice black solid color. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to start with a rectangle. And I'll fill in the rectangle like this with my brush. And let me go ahead and use the bracket key to make my brush bigger, save myself a little bit of time, and we'll fill that in. Okay? Which isn't bad, but now we really have a nice grounded building, which is part of it. The problem here is that if we zoom in and look at this, it's a perfectly flat ground, right? Which really isn't that normal, right? Also, the ground outside is exactly level with the ground inside, which really isn't the case. So I need to make a few modifications to this ground. And I'll focus first on this side of the building. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw, with the regular lasso tool, a selection. And what I want to do is I want to kind of give myself a little bit of a straight down, and then I want to give myself a little bit of ground, something like that. Right? And if you've done your selection and you end up not liking it, you can always redo it. The other thing is it would be nice if this was a little sharper right at the edge. So let me go ahead and add to the selection with the rectangular marquee. I'm going to hold down Shift, and we'll sharpen up that right at the edge, like that. Okay. Now I'm going to paint this in white to make that. Oops. Oh, it's not going to let me over. Let me go ahead and paintbrush. I'll flip my color to white, and we'll paint that in white. And when I click off the selection, it looks a little bit more like ground. Okay. Likewise, I'm going to do this side. And so this time, I might do it slightly different just so you can see what it looks like. Again, I'm going to take this down first. So we'll take it down a little bit as part of the building. And then this time, we'll add to it with the regular select, or with the lasso tool. And I'm going to hold down Shift to add to the selection. And I'm going to draw, but I'm going to draw up. Something like that. Okay, so I have two problems. One, I have to get rid of this piece, and then I have to add to this piece. So I'm going to go with my brush tool. Let's make the brush smaller. Right, and I'll paint this in white, like that. Then I'm going to invert my selection. So I'll go to Select, Inverse, and I'll paint this. Oops, I have to switch colors. Black, and I'll paint this part in black. So now if we press Control-0, right, we have a little bit of basically a hillside that's happening. Okay, but this is starting to read like a nice, strong section. And down the road, you will create this topography based on whatever your actual site conditions are. Right, you use that topography, and we talk about that a lot more in Rhino, about how do you go from real topography and create this kind of a section. But for right now, this is all we really need. But I want to take it a step further in that I want to make this appear to be a little bit more realistic. And so what I'll do, right, we know that this is going to be taking place in a meadow. So I'm going to use my clone stamp tool with the grass brush. Let's do clone stamp with the grass brush here. And I'm going to do this so that, let me hold down Alt to copy from, so that it looks like there's a little bit of grass along the edge of the section. Right, something like that. My brush might be a little bit big, so maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller. Because it's a meadow, I want it to be a little bit tall in its grass. Right, but I'll keep adjusting my brush size, to fill in a little bit more. And what this is doing is it's taking it from being a very strong, solid section line to kind of softening the edge a little bit. So I have some long pieces of grass, and I'm using the short pieces to kind of fill in a little bit. Right? And so let's come over to the other side, right, this side, and we'll start with the small pieces of grass first. Like that. I have to hold down Alt and copy from over here this time. Let's get a little bit more there. And then let's get a few large pieces, a couple clumps that are bigger, right, something like that. And now I'll press Control-0, and we'll look down, and you see how much softer that section line has become instead of that strong section line. So we've done a lot just with a little bit of black to make this section read much more like a section, right? So remember, we originally went from a line drawing that looked something like this, right, to something that had a lot of depth to it, which was our big purpose. Okay? So now that we have that, we need to start working on getting our backdrop in place, right, our photographic backdrop. So first thing that we'll do is we have to go find the photo backdrop. So once again, I've always had luck with the Creative Commons search. Right? And so there. Yosemite Meadow, right? And then it's a matter of finding the right piece. Now remember, when I do this one, I'm going to be cutting through, right, the photograph someplace kind of in the mid-range. So I really need to pay attention to kind of the length of the grass and where that's going to work. Also, do I want there to be a slight hill behind my scene, or do I want to be looking more down? So you have to kind of pay attention. This grass would be probably a little bit too long for my particular scene. Sorry, you have to give me a little bit of time to look through. Sometimes having a tree or something is nice, but this tree is too big, too dominant. Right? This one actually could work nicely. And again, I'm doing this live, so we're just kind of experimenting as we go. Let me go ahead and download the original. There it is. Let me show in my folder. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this to my flash drive. So I'm going to go to Copy. And helps if I can find my 135 folder. And we'll go ahead and paste this in place. There it is. Right? And so I'm going to use that one back in Photoshop. So here I am back in my Photoshop file. I'm going to go to File and then Place. And I'm going to look for that image. There it is. And now I need to make some adjustments to it. So I need to make it a little bit larger. Right? So we'll make it larger. Control minus. Obviously, it has to be at least that large. Right? And then I need to kind of judge where the ideal placement would be for where my grass is going to be and where I'm going to be cutting through. Right? So we'll go ahead and say that that's OK for right now. And I get my image in there. We may find that I need a little bit more space above my image because I've chopped off too much of this. So since we're here, I'm going to go ahead and go to Image and then Canvas Size. This icon right here controls where the canvas is going to be added. So if I click in the lower center, it's going to add canvas to the top, which is what I want. And so let's increase the height, I don't know, 25, something like that. Say OK. It gives me enough space to include all of this. Okay? If I were to turn this off, you see that it hasn't affected my original drawing at all. That still exists just fine. This is here. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to drop this below here. And I'm going to change layer 0 temporarily to multiply, just so that I can kind of see through and adjust my background image so that it works. Okay? So let's look at this image a little bit. And I'm going to do a little bit of moving until I feel like it's in about the right position. Right, something like that. Kind of looking at the slope of the meadow, imagining that it would go